and welcome back to another episode of Solo Sundays with Meg, not Margaret. I am your host, Meg, not Margaret. Solo Sundays with Meg, not Margaret is a part of the WOGDTO Network, a channel dedicated to exploring and showcasing all the amazing tabletop roleplay games that are out there. This week we are playing And D, a solo RPG about a dragon named Andy by Super Dylan. As per usual, I have the game linked in the description. I also have the creators' socials. Alright, let's get into it. All you need to play this game is a deck of playing cards with the jokers removed, and you can also choose to write and log your experiences as Andy the dragon. And with that, we are ready to play the game. Okay, so the first few cards that you pull just kind of establish who Andy the dragon is. The first card, Andy has been born, hatched from an egg, cozy in an old and established nest built by their parents ages ago. They are born to how many siblings? I drew the 5 of hearts, so Andy has 5 siblings. Should I name them all? Let's name them all. Let's go with Andy, Randy, Mandy, Sandy. We can do Candy, short for Candace. Andy, Randy, Mandy, Sandy, Candy, and Jill. I think because Andy's name starts with an A, my brain wants them to be the oldest, so I think Andy is probably the first hatched of the clutch. And as such, they have taken on a very much older sibling, mentor kind of guide to their siblings, even though they're not that far apart in age. Okay, this next card determines the nest and the location of it. For this card, the 5 of diamonds, that means that the nest is deep in a thick and colorful forest. I imagine like a really lush, deciduous forest with lots of red leaves on the trees and groves of aspen with just golden leaves fluttering in the wind. But I think that there's probably a little mountain spring that runs by, and in just sort of this alcove of rocks is where the nest is, and that's where the little eggs hatched. The third card discusses neighbors. This is the 7 of clubs. On a 2 through a 10, the card reveals that it is many miles of flight, carried by their parents, of course, to see other dragons. The fourth card determines Andy's special breath weapon. Andy has fire breath. Maybe Randy, Mandy, Sandy, Candy, and Jill all got ice breath or lightning breath, because that fits more for a mountain. But Andy's special. Okay, now for the 5th card. Okay, I drew the 4 of diamonds. Red cards reveal that Andy is a natural at flying. The 6th card, regardless of having siblings, Andy will eventually make friendships of their own as they grow. Over time, one friend becomes more special to Andy than the others. This is Andy's best friend, and they have the following magic type. Acid. Ooh, interesting, the one I haven't touched on. I love how that worked out. Oh, I have to come up with a name. If Andy's name is And D, maybe we should go for D-and. And it's Deanne. Deanne is Andy's best friend. I think that Deanne's nest was raided by adventurers, and the adventurers didn't know how to hatch a dragon egg, so they left it behind. And so Deanne has been fending for herself her whole life all alone. But then Andy came and wanted to be her friend, and they became best friends. What kind of things do they do together, and what is their name? Okay, so her name is Deanne. With acid and fire, I think that Andy would like to kind of kick up dust and melt it into like little bits of glass. And I think that Deanne likes to kind of spit acid at these big rocks, and they like to make pretty sculptures and things together. Ah. So that brings us up to the end of Andy's childhood, and we will check back in with Andy in 9 years. In those 9 years, we follow Andy and Deanne as they follow the river. They wanted to see where it goes. They wanted to see where it comes from. So they began at the top of the mountain with the snow melt. And as the snow melted, the water ran into these amazing valleys that were beginning to form through its slow but steady current. Sometimes they would go in the morning and they would see the deer drinking from the water, and if they were very, very quiet, they could get right up next to them and count the beautiful spots on the spring fawns. Deanne learned that she had to be very careful when she was by the river with her acid breath. There was a few incidents in those years where she got a little too close and the plants were not so happy about it. But with death comes new life, and the years continued to pass. The next 4 years, I imagine that in the span of that time, Deanne and Andy get quite familiar with the mountains, and I think at some point they're eager to journey. They want to see what all is out there beyond the Golden Hills, and so they take flight and they travel. Andy knew where some of the other dragon establishments were. Deanne had never been before, having been raised all by herself. Andy knows about the 2 nearest ones, so they go there first. They meet the river dragons. They meet the snowy dragons that live up in the north. From there, they're given directions to the other clans, the other dragon settlements, some bustling with activity and life, and others a bit more private, a bit more simple. So this one is a 6 of hearts. 6 more years pass, and though their travels have been fun, Andy begins to feel homesick. They've spent so much time with Deanne, their best friend, whom they love very much, but Randy and Mandy and Sandy and Candy and Jill and Andy's parents are still in the Golden Hills. Deanne seems a little less excited about the prospect of going back. The Golden Hills have become their home too, but there's still that emptiness, having not known where they came from, who they came from. And I think in these 6 years, Deanne goes away. That makes me really sad. I think they leave on amicable terms. I don't think that there's a fight. I don't think there's a major disagreement. I think Andy understands. No, Andy doesn't understand. Andy has always had a home. Andy has always had their family. They don't understand, but they support Deanne. And that's enough. Deanne is kind enough to take Andy back to the Golden Hills. She stops by, says hello to the family, and then she is gone. Andy doesn't hear from Deanne for 6 years. Sometimes when Andy misses her a lot, they'll go up to the very tippy top of the mountain like they used to go with Deanne. And as they look down through the valley at all the little homes and the buildings beginning to crop up, they think about how Deanne isn't a place, but Deanne is still home. Those 6 years pass, as years tend to do. She flies back, her green scales flashing in the brilliant sun. Andy flies down to meet her. Do dragons hug? I think the dragons probably can hug, right? Andy gives Deanne an enormous hug, and Deanne returns it. Deanne is back. But she seems a little different. Her sparkling green scales are not quite as sparkling as they used to be. They seem to be more dull, almost worn. Deanne eventually does share details of her journey with Andy, but the details don't come easily. She was gone for 6 years, and in that time she learned a lot about where she came from. She was able to find her old nest, having since been razed to the ground. There were no dragons around, and as much as Deanne wanted fulfillment for that, she just had to accept that there are some things you can't ever know. The biggest thing that Deanne learned while she was gone was that a place that was once her home would never be her home again. Her home now was not a place, but a person. And that's when she knew she had to go home. That's when she knew she had to go to Andy. Hey, this is my first card that isn't a numbers card. Andy has gotten one step closer to building their own nest. It begins one day when Andy is out for a fly. It's early in the morning, so the people down below in the villages don't ask too many questions about the things they see in the sky over the Golden Hills. Shed after shed after shed throughout the years has led Andy's scales to become a brilliant scarlet, and as they fly, the early morning sun reflects off of their shining scales. The image of the sunlight on their scales was so similar to the firelight in the valleys below, and Andy felt themselves swell with pride at the thought of being a beacon of hope, of being something that draws the eye to let others know that even in the dark, no one is alone. And so in the early mornings after their first morning flight, Andy will return to the mountaintop, breathing fire at the dirt and the dust and the sand on the tops of the mountain, creating a foundation for the future. The next 7 years are uneventful. That's okay with Andy. In their added time at the top of the mountain, they have an even better look at the valley below. They see what used to be small little huts begin to become something more, something bigger. And though their parents tell them to stay away, they can't help but feel very curious at what lies below. They go down one evening after the sun has set in the cover of night. It is that time of year that gives the Golden Hills their name, the leaves beginning to fall, and the red and the orange from the leaves being a perfect camouflage for our dazzling dragon. As they make their way down toward the mountain, they see a large fire, and at first, Andy is a little alarmed. Usually fires on the mountain are not a good thing. But as they get closer, they see the people down below seem to be cheering, seem to be excited as they stand and enjoy the warmth of the fire. Eventually, Andy realizes they're not alone. They look and see Deanne next to them. But the warmth of the fire becomes something else in her eyes. It's not warmth, it's heat, it's bitter. Andy sort of nuzzles over and asks what's the matter. They're people. These people have so much, but it still is not enough for them. And someday, even all of the Golden Hills won't be enough for them. Dragons have the reputation for being hoarders, but don't think you know what a human won't do for something they want. And she leaves. This queen card means that a great treasure has been abandoned, full of magical artifacts. Andy has yet to make their own hoard. After all, Andy has everything they need. They have their family with them, they have Deanne with them, they have the Golden Hills all around. But when the news comes in from the River clans that a great treasure has been abandoned, they admit it piques their interest. Deanne warns them they're not the only one that's heard about this treasure. There could be conflict, but Andy just wants to know. Andy goes and finds this amazing cave with rocks dangling from the ceiling, brilliant, colorful gems flashing and glinting with every puff of breath. Not only the gems, there's the gold, there's the coins, there's chalices and plates of armor and so many things. The thing that strikes Andy is an old chest tucked in the back. It's plain, it's brown, there isn't even a lock on it, but Andy feels themselves drawn to it, and as they nudge open the unlocked chest, inside they find scrolls. At first, Andy doesn't realize what they are and accidentally lights one or two on fire, but as one burns and shrivels, they see ink on the paper. So carefully, they tuck up the scrolls back into the chest, close it up, and fly it back home. Nervous about what could happen to the chest of scrolls they took, Andy decided to take the long way back. Andy knew that people tended to settle in open fields and was surprised when they found a wooden building in the forest. Rolling around in the dirt to temporarily dull their scales' shines, they crept around, giving a wide berth to the small village. And as the sun set, Andy felt themselves linger, hoping to see that warmth, that familiar glow of a fire at night. The town slept, and Andy crept in, peeking through windows and seeing people fast asleep. They also stumbled upon a large building, and inside seemed to be more scrolls. As they leaned in to get a closer look, an older person popped up in the window. Stark white hair. Andy froze. The person disappeared from the window, and the door of this building opened, holding in their hands a large maroon tome. They opened the first page, turned it around for Andy to see. There was a drawing of a dragon, and some scribbles of a text Andy didn't know, but some scribbles of words that Andy did know. Andy looked back at the chest of scrolls still gripped in their claws. They carefully opened the chest with one claw, pinching out a tiny little scroll. The person looked at the book, at the scroll, at the dragon. As they reached out a hand to the scroll, they offered the book in their hand. And the two traded. And before anyone else could see, Andy leapt to the skies. Andy returned home, and after greeting their family and Deanne, began poring over this book, slowly beginning to understand how to read. Over the next 5 years, Andy studied that book, delicately turning the thin pages, absorbing as much as they could, trying their best to understand the correlation between the text that they knew and the script that they didn't. By the time 5 years go by, Andy has all but memorized each word on each scroll from their chest, and they begin to want more. They go back up to the mountaintop, to the firm foundation they built many years ago, began to carve the words into the rocks around them. Andy knew what a library was. The book helped him understand, and if they wanted more to read, they would have to give up what they had. But stories are so much more than words. They are feelings, they are messages, they are lessons. And one night, Andy packs up the scrolls, taking the chest with them. On the way down the mountain, they mix up some water and some dirt. They take a large piece of bark from a nearby tree, and between scratching and painting the words onto the bark, they simply write, "Trade. It is dark in the village, except for the campfires at night." And they carefully leave the chest there. And thus begins the first library in the Golden Hills. It has been 42 years since we began our story. The small village in the valley below that Andy had come to love watching was beginning to expand. Randy, Mandy, Sandy, Candy, and Jill began to make their way out into the world. It was probably for the best. The more dragons on the mountain, the more likely they were to be discovered, and as Deanne was very eager to remind, that wouldn't be a good thing. And over the next 8 years, the fires at night grew brighter. I just drew the Ace of Diamonds, which I'm very excited about. Andy has had children of their own. Jill returned to the Golden Hills. She seemed alarmed. She was coming from very far away, a land where the earth created fire and the land was but a speck in a sea of blue. Kept safe in her claws was a chest, not unlike the one that Andy had carried those years ago, full of scrolls. Inside, however, were 3 eggs. They were left on the top of a mountain, Jill said. I waited to see if anyone would come back for them, but there was no one around. Andy, you have always known what to do. You have always taken charge. What do we do with these eggs? Deanne sidled up next to Andy, placing a gentle claw over their chest. We'll take them. And she looks at Andy. Andy is startled for a moment before nodding their head in agreement. We'll take them. I've been building a nest, and what good is a nest with nobody to live in it? The chest, lined with velvet, soft and warm, is placed gently in the clearing that Andy has made on top of the Golden Hills. Surrounded by stories in the dragon script, in the person script. Dragon hoards are things that are special. Things that a dragon wants to keep, wants to hoard, but the thought of these eggs, Andy couldn't wait to share these stories with them. 2 years pass, the eggs hatch. Andy, wholly unprepared to be a parent, and Deanne, even less so, learned through trial and error and from kindly words from Andy's parents that the best way to go about raising dragons is to stay on your toes. And the mountains that once were so full of dragons were full once again. Just as they always have, the years pass, seasons come and go. The baby dragons don't stay babies for long. And they grow, and they fly, and they live. They go out to explore the world just as Deanne and Andy had all those years ago. Sometimes they return with friends, sometimes they return with lovers, and sometimes they return just on their own. But every time they're always eager to curl up under the warmth of Andy as they tell them a story. 10 more years pass, and soon the trips back home become shorter. From their home on the top of the Golden Hills, they see the valley below, sprawling, growing. Andy passes the day by returning to their surrogate library, the chest full of scrolls that gets switched out every so often. Perhaps the fact that years and years of this library being around has made Andy overconfident. But if they spend time down in the village, they can hear whispers, they can hear rumors, people talking about how there are beasts in the mountain with treasure beyond imagination. Andy has read scrolls like that before, and Deanne's words echo in his mind. Soon, what they have will not be enough. This is the Ace of Clubs, which means that this is the story's end. An Ace of Clubs is drawn, revealing that a group of 5 self-righteous level 20 adventurers, whatever that means, have successfully made their way to Andy's well-protected nest, despite all measures. They came prepared and ready to destroy everything you've built and take the things you love as a reward for their trouble. Andy will not win this fight head-on. I don't think Andy would stay. Andy hasn't been careful enough. The rumors become confirmed, and what they have is not enough. They bring in other people from other lands to go and to seize the Golden Hills. They cannot stay. They have nothing for the people to take, just stones with stories engraved on them. Andy has read scrolls and books and stories written by people like these adventurers, where if the gold is not enough, the dragon is the spoil. Andy and Deanne are able to convince Andy's parents to leave and to find somewhere else. And together, Deanne and Andy watch as the torches make their way up the mountains. The river from the snowmelt is strong this year, and as they watch and follow the river downstream, they see the sculptures they made as children. Acid burning through stone, fire melting the dirt into strange shapes. Their lasting impression on the mountain. They see all the special spots that they would sit with Deanne and watch the village grow and bloom. They watch the stones lovingly carved into with stories shared to their children. And they watch until they can't watch anymore. They take flight. They haven't decided where they'll go. Andy is saying goodbye to the only home they've ever known, to their stories. But they know that stories are more than just words on a paper. Their feelings, their lessons, their memories, their what makes a life. And as sad as they are for this story to come to a close, they know a new beginning is just around the corner. I'm crying alone in my room from a dragon named Andy. I need a minute. Cut the cameras. There you have it. That is Aunt D. Again, the game is linked down below, as well as Super Dylan's socials. Thank you so much for watching, for sharing this story with me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel here at WOGDTO so you don't miss out on any more Ssmnm videos. We're also uploading our old VODs from our WOGDTO stream, which is picking back up again this Friday at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, so be sure to follow us on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram so you make sure you don't miss out on any awesome content. Thanks again for being here with me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next Sunday. Bye!